I always think it's a really interesting question of sort of asking procurement people what they're KPI'd on, because ultimately it's any negotiations, you're trying to find a middle ground, the classic cliche, isn't it, where everyone's a little bit disappointed. But I think understanding what are they there to do, like what are they getting pressure on to do.
My name's Mike Lander, and you're listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast, where we bring you actionable insights about sales RFPs, negotiations, and difficult procurement discussions from sales leaders, brand leaders, and procurement leaders. Please subscribe to get updates when new episodes are released. Geoff, thanks ever so much for joining me on Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, really excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Geoff. It should be great fun. And we had a fun conversation before we started. As we discussed, we're probably going to end up talking about some broad themes and then go down some rabbit holes, but that's part of the fun. So before we kick off, because people are listening going, who's Geoff? So Geoff, who are you? What do you do? And anything slightly different about yourself?
I'm Geoff. I'm the CEO of Builtvisible. So we're a specialist organic agency, fully independent, kind of 15 years or so in with expertise within organic search, and more recently sort of broadening out to look at reducing ineffective spends and looking at customer journeys in more in the round. In terms of something interesting, the thing everyone is absolutely sick of me talking about, which I'll sort of wheel out now, is that I have absolutely zero qualifications for doing what I do, in so much as I used to be a professional rugby player. So that's kind of the thing. That's the I guess the USP in terms of digital agency ownership.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was kind of a mediocre professional rugby player. How about that?
I'm sure you weren't mediocre. Who did you play for? Some interest?
I spent about 8 years in the English Championship. So
wow.
Played for teams like Bedford, Rotherham, Plymouth, and Esher. Before kind of winding it down, going part-time and building a career at the same time. Never quite made it, but had a wonderful time along the way, and it certainly sort of taught me a lot about how the world works, and also sort of high-performing organisations, which I hope sort of carries through to Builtvisible today.
So something that we haven't prepared at all, listeners, is I'd also like to weave in, Geoff, if we can talk about that high-performance teams piece as part of the discussion. That would be really interesting about the crossover between sports, leadership, and high-performing teams and agency high-performing teams. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, Geoff, why don't we kick off with precisely that?
Let's start there. I think there's I think in terms of the way I always talk about it is I think rugby is an interesting sport in terms of it's quite a closed loop where you play the game and then you kind of enter the management or the administrative side of the game. And you do that because you're a good player, not because you're necessarily a good manager or coach or administrator. And I think there's something quite similar in that in services business in terms of typically career progression in a services business is you're very good at the thing and all of a sudden you're then line managing more people. And you're not necessarily equipped for that, but you're a subject matter expert. And there's some parallels there. And I've kind of looked at, across my career in rugby, teams that were very, very good at that whole piece around management and kind of, managing players. And I also saw what bad looked like. So a lot of what I kind of apply to my business management philosophy, if we're going to be so grandiose about it, is it is a lot of what I saw that wasn't good, and how can we do the opposite, and how can we really empower people and help them sort of get the autonomy, build a career. And obviously there's all the good stuff from team sports, such as realizing you're a part of something bigger than yourself, fostering a high performing culture, fostering loyalty, resilience is a big thing that I think is often lacking and you don't get taught, whereas sport really does teach you that. So there's sort of heaps of parallels. I think there's lots of cliches around it all as well, but it's certainly something I draw on every day is my kind of experience within sport, and hopefully it affects Builtvisible for the better.
So, I'm not a massive sports fan. Never have been. It wasn't part of my kind of growing up, which is a bit sad in many ways. I wish I was. I think it builds amazing friendships if you've got a sport that you're passionate about. But if you look at, looking at sports teams, and you'll have played in a number of different teams, as you said, I was watching a program the other day, and I think it was Beckham's program, about when you put Beckham into different teams, sometimes they perform just out of their socks, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Even though you've got amazing star players, as a team, collective, sometimes it doesn't work. Did you work out why? Why is it that just having the star players doesn't make you a brilliant team in sports?
I think it's an old cliche, but I think rugby is sort of one of the ultimate team sports. And certainly within rugby, you've all got your positions and your value adds. So I was a fullback or a winger. So I was fast and powerful and could do various things. But, I wouldn't be much use in the scrum, for example.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm expected to go and hit rucks and do things that weren't necessarily my job. And so I think what rugby gave me a lot on that basis is understanding where my strengths are and where my weaknesses are, and where actually someone else is much better tasked or suited to a role. And I think once you get that at scale, you're beginning to get people really kind of dropping the ego. That's a big thing in rugby, is that people, you typically don't get a lot of egos. It's very much sort of a we before me mentality. And absolutely, you can be the best player in the world, but if you don't buy into the team environment, you're just not going to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real skill of managers. And if you look at, for football managers, for example, the way that Sir Alex Ferguson managed United, all of those years, it was because he was very, very clear about that as an idea. And in that Beckham documentary, it's fascinating. As soon as
it's brilliant, wasn't it?
Ferguson was done, he was like, right, Beckham's out, and he was ruthless with it. And I think there's something to be learned in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in the business and agency world, we often see people who are amazingly talented individuals, but if they can't work as part of a team, they quickly become a liability.
Absolutely, and the most toxic thing is if the leadership don't do anything about it. So you've got to be really hot on it and sort of make sure you're really setting that agenda, because otherwise it begins to spread, and people do see the behaviours. And one of the things I always talk about rugby is it's very, very self-policing. So if somebody steps out of line of the values of the club or sort of the way things worked, is that on a rugby pitch, in training, is you'll get punched in the face, which HR, in agency life isn't as keen on. But I think the
understandably, yes.
I think the principle still applies, though, in terms of there's a way of doing things here. This is the culture around it, and the more that a team can self-police that, and it's not about management saying you do this, you do that. You're onto something really, really good. And again, that was a really common thread throughout my career. Luckily, I didn't get punched in the face too much for that reason.
So I ran a consultancy business a number of years ago, and there were over 100 consultants at one point, who were all, interestingly, freelancers. And on that point about self-policing, it was amazing that the organism, which was the collection of 100 consultants, who were all freelancers, it created its own culture. And people that came in as new consultants that didn't fit the culture, I didn't do anything. They basically kind of left quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because the organism rejects the kind of foreign body.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's exactly that. And I've been in organisations where it does happen, and also where it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Both in rugby and also, in my career now. So, it's a really interesting sort of dynamic. But I think, again, the background in sport, I can see it. And what you do about it is the main thing. But I think that's definitely something I've carried through from sport.
And one of the agencies that I'm involved in, we have a bit of a mantra of we will hire for will and we will train for skill. We'd much rather have someone that's got the right mindset and the right values and the right attitude and train them up than we would take on someone, obviously at very senior management levels, it's a bit different, but it's easier to train someone's skills than it is to change the way that they behave.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously with what we do in digital is, you can't really go and get a degree or a qualification in it. A lot of it is learning on the job. And so, you very quickly arrive at, how does someone learn on the job? What is their attitude to failure, to sort of setbacks or success? And how do they collaborate? You get there very, very quickly as soon as you've done the CV check of have they done things before. Whether they have or not, you end up in the same place anyway, which is how do they approach things?
Exactly. So let's get on to the topic of what people may be listening about, which is like commercial leadership, negotiations, insight into procurement, etc. So given the type of marketing services agency that you are, what challenges does an agency like yours have to overcome during the sales cycle? Especially when you're dealing with people like procurement or very tough buyers. What makes it a bit different in your business?
It's a good question. I think because we're sort of specialist organic, I think, and by organic, I mean kind of SEO, content strategy, digital PR, those types of things. I think because of where those services or those channels sit generally within marketing, is that one of the biggest things we have to overcome often is education in terms of what is it that people are actually buying. So I think buying marketing services is arguably a little bit easier on the kind of the media side or the paid side. It all fits reasonably neatly into a spreadsheet. There's kind of returns and days and charges and that kind of thing. Whereas I think with SEO or organic more generally, I think people try and package it up like the media side, and it doesn't really work for what the sell is. Particularly, we're a very strategic agency, so we'll go in and consult and try and go on a bit of a journey with the client. And the thing is like, what are you actually selling? What's the deliverable on day 1, 2, 3, month 1, month 3? And very quickly we're seeing more and more is that it's okay if you're sort of selling to someone who has a good depth of understanding of that. However, often, obviously, with procurement, you're coming in perhaps with a marketing procurement department, very, very used to buying a lot of easier things to buy. And it's trying to put a bit of a square peg in a round hole is the way I kind of describe it. So, and I really empathize. It's not sort of a moan. It's sort of actually, this is really difficult to buy. In the same vein that it's sort of difficult to sell. Right. So a lot of my approach, if we're dealing with a larger enterprise organization or something like that where procurement do step in, it's kind of going on the journey with them a little bit and without being patronizing, kind of doing a bit of the education around what it is we're selling, and trying to bring it to life in a way that it actually solves a problem for them in the future. Whether or not they select Builtvisible, that's just their decision. But actually, if procurement's job is to make good purchasing decisions, then it doesn't matter who they choose. If they don't choose me, if we can leave them kind of actually a little bit further forward in their thinking around how to buy what we do, then they will remember that will move the whole, on the basis of sort of all boats rise.
Yes.
I think there's something quite powerful in that. Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting topic as well about. And I talk to other agencies about this a lot, is educating the buyer, particularly procurement people, around the kind of problems that you solve, the value that you add, where the tank traps are that the client shouldn't fall into. Whether they buy you now or not, if they're a big enough company, at some point they're going to have those problems. They're going to remember what Geoff said, and they're going to come back to you. And I think I was taught the kind of trusted advisor model of how you basically want to become the client's trusted advisor, whereby they not only have a professional relationship with you, but they come to you because you've got deep insights about something that they need to understand in more detail, and you're effectively the shortcut.
And I think there's something really interesting. I'm always quite flippant about it, which is a bit unfair, but I always think, if procurement have a very tough job, they kind of sit in the middle.
Yep.
And they're there to facilitate. But if you're either trying to buy, deeper on the client side or you're selling on the services side, you could feasibly have two sets of people looking at procurement in the middle saying, well, they're just sort of getting in the way and being a bit awkward. And so I think there's a lot of merit in doing what you're saying, which is that kind of moving them forward and going on a bit of a journey. It's quite interesting when I think back, kind of the more involved and heated discussions I've had with procurement have often led to sort of, as you say, sort of longer lasting relationships where, they're not necessarily putting you forward on a shortlist, but you're there in the mixer in terms of, well, actually, I'm trying to buy to solve this big problem. What's your early view on it?
Exactly.
Et cetera. It's often a really interesting way to get in with clients when you're not on that kind of initial shortlist.
I think it definitely is, and I think your ability to explain the different ROI models between organic, and paid and social and influencer and how all that works and how you kind of reduce your risk and maximize your return, that's a much better conversation to have with procurement, because they won't understand the technicalities of SEO. You can educate them on those, but they will understand we've got $5 million to spend in the next year. We need to get this kind of sales uplift or this kind of brand impact. Talking to them about how they solve that problem, even if they don't appoint you now, they'll remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always, I always think it's a really interesting question of sort of asking procurement people what they're KPI'd on.
Right.
Because ultimately it's any negotiations, you're trying to find a middle ground, the classic cliche, isn't it, where everyone's a little bit disappointed. But I think understanding what are they there to do? Like, what are they getting pressure on to do? And
correct.
It's quite easy for me as the owner of an independent business. I can kind of do what I want. So I'm in quite a privileged position, but we're going up against often quite an immovable object, or a set of a bit of a diktat around what needs to happen with a buying process. And so I often think that unlocks a lot of insight, that question, because
Absolutely.
actually I've got a lot of flexibility. I can make that really work for me because it's all give and take. But why are they asking these questions is often the thing.
Exactly right.
They're not just being there to be a pain.
It's peeling back the onion layers. So just an example, if we were having a conversation, Geoff, and you said to me, what are you KPI'd on, Mike? I'd be like, it's quite a bold question, Geoff, but let me just talk through kind of where we are at the moment. And it might be, yes, I'm trying to drive savings on a like-for-like basis. Or it might be, and actually we have got a reliability issue, so we're looking at that. Or innovation. In the age we're in now, what we need to see is agencies that can invest in AI to the benefit of the client while still being profitable. How do you solve that problem? It could be about risk management. I think having that conversation, as you say, about, well, what's most important to you? What are you incentivized by? What are your KPIs? How can I work with you to try and make it work? That's a very refreshing conversation to have, I think.
Yeah, and especially in a world where, especially in what we do, is everything's getting a lot more commoditized.
Yeah.
It's easy to very quickly jump to, this is just going to be a bun fight around pricing.
Right.
Whereas actually that is the wrong conversation to have a lot of the time, because
completely,
those questions you were just saying there, finding out about, okay, what's the strategic direction? How can we add the value there? What does this look like? That's all positive. It's all about ROI, not the I, if that makes sense.
Exactly right.
Which again, I think, it's sometimes easy to sort of jump too quickly to, well, this is going to end up a conversation about price, because that's not a good way to buy.
No, and again, I'll often talk to people about on the supply side, on the agency side. As a buyer, I don't think I ever refused to work with an agency or a supplier of any kind because they were too expensive. What I often, did and made sure that certain suppliers and agencies weren't appointed was because they couldn't articulate the value. So if they can't articulate the value and they refuse to for whatever reason, but they insist on sticking to a price point, then I'll be like, well, I'll just go back to my own type. I'll be like, okay, well, I'm good at driving down price based upon scope, based upon deliverables and SLAs, and I'll do my job. If you can't educate me, and if you can't stop me by linking the value to the price, I'll then do my job, which is I'll basically keep on going until you stop. So that's the agency's problem, not my problem.
Yeah, and SEO and organic is so primed for that, because it's a very sort of technical discipline. It's multifaceted in the sense that there's different component parts of it, all of which can be themselves individually commoditized to a degree, or sort of reduced to that level. And often it's a big red flag for us in terms of qualification if things are packaged up where it's like, this is a technical brief only, or this is only about link building, or this is only about content.
Absolutely.
That's just a buyer buying the way that the organization is manifesting how they want to do SEO.
Yes.
So we've just done one recently, which was quite interesting, where there's lots of conversations around sort of quite proxy metrics, proxy KPIs, and ordinarily we'd just say no. I was like, well, that's not really, we're genuinely not the best agency to do that, because you do get into this commoditized tactical play rather than anything strategic. But the conversation we had with procurement was, it was like, well, let's be super, super clear. It's like, we really want to work with you because you're a great brand for us. I don't agree with how it's packaged up, but I completely understand why. And we come up in SEO, as you know, Mike, you come up against it all the time where people have been burned before.
Yes,
and so everyone in the future is then a victim. And they said, we've been burnt before on this. We haven't, we've been really, really let down by other agencies, and we just need to protect ourselves. And there it's like, well, I've got to weigh it up. How stubborn am I? How stubborn are they? And where we actually got to is actually, let's do a really good deal on this first bit, get really clear measurement in place. But the whole premise of it is I want to unlock a much bigger strategic conversation around,
exactly.
Okay, what does this look like holistically over 3 years? We're not messing around talking about a few months of tactical support. Just from a seller standpoint, you go on your spidey senses of, do they understand why I'm having that conversation the way I'm having it, and do we think the potential is there? And you're always going to carry a bit of risk, but you are anyway. I think it's always a balance to be struck.
But the fact that you've opened that conversation up, if as a brand, they have been burnt before, then what you're saying is, I understand that, and how do I de-risk you from getting burnt again? Well, what I'll do is we'll change the commercial structure, and we'll have a phase one, which is a bit of a diagnostic, with we'll build dashboards and we'll baseline your data, and we'll give you a strategy, and that's phase one. And if you choose to walk at that point, well, no harm done. You've paid us a fee, and we've given you value, and you've got a way of going forward. But if you do decide to go forward, then if it's a 3-year commitment, maybe we back out part of that initial phase one against the 3 year. There's all sorts of things you can do once you start to de-risk their position.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, you've sort of, the attraction for me with those types of conversations is you are unlocking long-term potential. You're removing it from the here and now of that conversation and going, it's a negotiation. You're sort of liberating yourself from it. It's like, well, yeah, this is a negotiation, but it's part of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And it's like anything, sort of the more you zoom out, the smaller that issue becomes.
Exactly.
So it's quite exciting.
Talk about commoditization. So what's happening in the kind of the organic world regarding performance growth and regarding commoditization of services, and how do you get out of that whole commoditization trap? Because it is one that a lot of agencies are falling into.
I think number one is being very aware of it. It happening and kind of, and where to sort of, I guess, define it a little bit. Often in a procurement discussion in particular, or any kind of buying discussion, is what we're saying is, we're going to deliver these services, and then everything becomes about, a tactical output of those services, which, as to your point previously, doesn't actually articulate any kind of value to the client. You're sitting there about looking at costs and driving down margins, and agencies just getting margin erosion, which conversely inhibits their own ability to be better at being an agency. So
that's right.
Everyone's kind of losing, and it's understandable because of the economic climate. So I think with organic specifically, you've got, the way we package up our business, for example, is, we come from quite a technical SEO background, quite a strategic SEO background. The way the channel's evolved is actually you need to really understand UX, you need to really understand content, you need to understand digital PR, you need to understand online customer journeys as a whole.
Yeah.
And you need to understand how to measure them and prove the value. So our kind of response to commoditization is essentially the way that we package up our products and services, the way we market them, the way we generate new business leads, both inbound and sort of more prospecting based. So just make sure that we're having the right conversations with the right people as early as possible to almost never get into the commoditization discussion.
Exactly.
That said, is like that example I just gave you, where we're having a discussion where it's like, okay, we're going to have to start on this basis, because I think a lot of the market buys in that way. So we're kind of a victim of the briefs that exist, and a lot of what we're trying to do is educate and move it forward. And so sometimes you have to be willing to just take a hit on it and be like, okay, well, let's just get in there, but be really clear about, we want to move this to much more of a strategic, strategic grounding. Is kind of the aim. With our business, we're kind of 80 plus retained business. So
right,
we're in with clients. We're kind of having lots of ongoing long-term discussions. We have clients that have been with us for sort of 12 years, so those are the easy ones. The hard one, when you're trying to say, well, actually, I want someone else to come and do the same kind of thing over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
When particularly within organic, the industry is a little bit behind without sort of being too rude about it. So a lot of education.
And I think that whole the consultative sales process is really important. I like you, Geoff. I didn't come from the SEO world, but I work with SEO businesses, and I always come at it from being there's a business problem they're trying to solve, and I mean I'm not an SEO lead of any type. I'm a board advisor, but what kind of problems they're trying to solve? What's in their best commercial interest? What's in our best commercial interest, and how can we come to an arrangement that works for both parties, where we share some risk and reward? So we do some fixed fee, we do some for performance bonuses. No, we can't always tie ourselves to revenue uplift because we don't control as you were pointing out, that kind of conversion optimization piece is like, well, I can't guarantee you're going to get the sales uplift, but we can get as close as we possibly can to aligning our interest to your interest, which is growth, profitable growth.
Yeah, and that's kind of sort of almost why we partly evolved our offering, like to try and get a bit more control of that.
Yeah,
because it's almost like it's quite a flippant example of it, but like link targets are a classic of the SEO world. Where
absolutely,
people are like,
correct.
How many links am I going to get for this money?
Absolutely.
And the kind of point, the point I kind of make about that is like in any other walk of life, if I'm making an investment, my working assumption, I think anyone's working assumption, if they're making a financial investment, is they get a financial return.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for some reason, SEOs like to say,
exactly,
I'm going to pay you this money, and what I want from that is some links. Okay, fine. Yep. It's. I think it's a little
What's
bit.
What's the value of those links? It's hard to say what the value of those links are, but there'll be links. They will be links. Right. Okay.
So nothing moves on. But that's the thing. I think it's kind of on agencies a little bit to offer some of those answers, because the easiest one in the world is you pay us this and we'll get you that.
Yeah.
Easiest one in the world. But as you say, there's so many dependencies.
Yes.
And then the balance is, if you're sort of a smallish or medium-sized independent, you don't have the resource to just take everything. You're not the full service. You're not doing the tech. But ironically, you can add more value through the quality of your service than the big agencies, but they can have the breadth of service. So it's a tricky one. It's one we're always kind of fighting against. I think a lot of it is, once you're in and once you've got something over the line, like I said, our business is built on retention. So it's kind of, once we're in, we tend to stay in the fight quite well.
Yeah.
What that does is just breeds trust. And once you've got the trust, you're able to sort of influence internally and work through those dependencies.
Exactly.
Which clients appreciate. But going from a standing start is a bit different, a bit tough.
So let me talk about, just to kind of like finalize the conversation in the last kind of few minutes, around negotiations with clients. So can you think of a time when the negotiations went really well? You have procurement involved, you have the client involved, you were negotiating with the brand, with multiple parties, but there was something about the negotiation which made it successful for all parties. That might have been around the style. It could have been around the content. It could have been around the scope. But what I'm trying to get to the point of is, what in your mind makes a successful negotiation with a client where you both end up with, this is great for both of us? How do you set that up for success?
Very, very, very good question. I think the best ones we've done are often quite reliant. We're sitting here talking a lot about the buy side, right? And because I'm going at them the whole time. Okay, how do we work with them? I think some of the most successful ones we've done is where we've been vulnerable is the wrong word, but we're very open about what our business objectives are. Yeah, and again, it's a luxury afforded if you're an independent specialist like Builtvisible or whoever. Like, if you're talking to me, it's like, well, I can tell you how my business works. you know, and I can say, well, actually, there are certain things that are really important to me as an independent.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know, like running a healthy cash balance. That means something in a negotiation. That's a lever. Payment terms are a lever for me. You know,
longer term commitments.
Longer term commitments, what the client, what am I trying to achieve strategically? And I'm often very happy to be quite open with clients about that, because I think that's, and do it early, and it tends to unlock a bit of creativity, because I actually think negotiation,
it does.
It's kind of got a bit of a bad rep, but I think it's such a creative process. It's such a creative process because you're you know, it's like a marriage. You know, you can't just have everything one way. Not that I can talk about what a successful marriage looks like, but you know, you can sort of, it's about sort of give and take, and it's about you know, where is the compromise? And if you get that right, and I think the only way to get that right is to be a little bit vulnerable up front and say, you know, well, once you're into the negotiation, this is what's important to me, and actually, I can really help you out with what you're trying to achieve. If we look at this, and they're always the ones that I think go really, really well.
Exactly. And it sounds like also, so I think vulnerability is a great point. And the preparation, you know, the fact that you've thought it through before you get there. I was talking to an agency a while ago, you know, said to them, how long do you spend on the creative process of building the proposal? And they're like, I don't know, between 30 and 50 hours. I said, how long do you spend preparing the negotiation? They said, in the cab, on the way, 15 minutes, if we're lucky. And he said it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. And that kind of, you know, preparation and then being vulnerable, I think, that will take you a long way.
Yeah. And just getting the right people involved there. You know, if we're going in, we're going sort of, got a big process with a big corporate, and we know it's sort of coming down the line, then actually just getting the right people in the room. So get the FD in the room, right? Yeah, David, what are we looking? What are we looking like? What levers are you happy for us to flex? What could help you out?
Correct.
You know, get the ops director in the room. You know, okay, capacity wise, how are we looking to be able to service this? And there's so many levers. So and it's great for commerciality with the team as well. I think sort of exposing more of the team to that as well, and you know, just seeing how these deals get done is a very powerful thing. And getting the big brains in the room, basically.
Yeah, which is probably big brains outside of, definitely outside of you and me, Geoff, which is get people around us. We merely facilitate the discussions.
Yeah, there's no big brain here. I need a lot of help.
Nor on my end either, no. So, in summary, Geoff, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining me today. Just kind of like, what would be your kind of top 2 or 3 takeaways for someone listening? If they're an agency leader and they're growing their business, what would you say from this conversation with your kind of couple of things that you think they should take away?
Yeah, I think there's like the tangibles we've spoken about. I think one of the other things I'll sort of add into it is I think there's just, like I said, it's a very creative process. Sort of buying and selling is really creative. I think there's something in that you can really relish. I think people sort of often look at it as a bit of a scary thing, but it's actually a wonderful opportunity to get something off the ground on a brilliant front foot.
Completely agree.
And I think the only other thing, the big one I said, as you know, as we've just discussed, is, you know, how can you possibly negotiate if you don't know what's going to help you, and if you don't know what's going to help the client? So I think early upfront conversations, you know, to your point, preparation on the sell side, for sure, and then just early kind of, you know, getting to grips with what are they trying to achieve on the buy side, and because the answer's in the middle of those two things. Somewhere.
It is, and if actually, I was talking to someone about just before Christmas, about alignment of interests on that point, which is if up front you get things on the table really up front, and if you're completely misaligned and there's no overlap, then you're like, it's not going to work for either of us.
Probably not worth our time. Yeah,
exactly. And that's okay. At least we found out early.
Yeah. There's no sort of sunk cost into that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Geoff, it's been amazing. Thank you. Whereabouts can people find out more about you?
So builtvisible.com, probably the best place to find out about us. Or I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn. So yeah, feel free to drop me a DM if anyone wants to pick up anything and discuss further. Always happy to, and always reply. Brilliant.
Very good. Is there anywhere they can watch you play rugby, Geoff? Is it online anywhere?
Not anymore, thankfully. No. That's think for everyone's benefit, I sacked it off in 2019. So I've been a few years retired now. So I've been put out to pasture. So
very good.
Yeah.
I'm sure you still enjoy and watch the game then.
I prefer watching it with a beer now. Yeah,
exactly. Geoff, thanks
no one
ever so
trying
much.
to hurt me.
Yeah,
nice one. Thanks ever so much, Mike.
All right, thanks, Geoff.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Higgle, the B2B Sales Club podcast series with your host, Mike Lander. Please subscribe so that you'll catch all the next episodes.